Everyone, welcome to the AngelNV Entrepreneur Bootcamp. This is our next session. This is really an important section because it's really aggregating a lot of what we've already discussed, and it'll be a nice segue into a final two or three sessions of the bootcamp. Today, we will be talking about the basics of raising capital and kind of the overarching strategy and some things that you need to know when you start to consider whether you should and how to go raise money from early investors and venture capitalists and angel investors. I will absolutely introduce our speaker here in just a minute. I'm going to go over the AngelNV Bootcamp for those who have this is your first time, and for our online audience, and then we will get into our speaker and what's coming up. So the AngelNV Entrepreneur Bootcamp is really about bringing together two sides of an ecosystem, entrepreneurs and investors, and we work to provide resources and education to founders. So this is structured over a course of 15 weeks. There's 13 sessions on the basics of raising capital and a little bit of Startup 101 thrown in there to provide you with the knowledge and know-how to understand what are your next steps for your venture, to ascertain if you might have a venture, to conduct the market research, to figure out what your next steps might be. If I have a venture concept here, is the market big enough? And really to determine if the overarching goal is to determine if your next step is to raise capital or scale the venture, or maybe you haven't started the venture and you want to consider find out if the venture idea is feasible. We're working in this bootcamp to bring that to bear and provide you some knowledge and resource and expert speakers on these topics. At the other end of the AngelNV experience is the investors, where we take dozens of accredited investors and teach them how to conduct due diligence, how to syndicate an investment, how to invest in startups and hopefully Nevada-based startups. And these two sides are going to meet here at the turn of the year in April, where these investors will decide, they'll select a company to invest up $400,000 in, and potential for runners-up to receive a sizable sum of investment as well. And hopefully a number of those ventures are here in this room or online or running through this AngelNV Bootcamp. The application is open. You can definitely find it. We will send that information out. You can also find it online at angelnv.com, and we'll be sharing that information as well, but you can definitely ask us about that after the session. This investment, this $400,000 investment that will take place in April, is really not possible without the SSBCI, or the State Small Business Credit Initiative program that we have partnered with the state of Nevada. And now in this program, we are a special contractor, we're a special partner with the state, whereby we make investments in Nevada-based startups, and the state of Nevada matches our investment and our terms. You can imagine this has a huge impact, effectively doubles the capital that we can deploy to Nevada-based startups. So we will be investing $200,000, and the state will be investing $200,000 minimum in this first startup. So we're really excited to be partnered with the Governor's Office of Economic Development to bring this power program, to bring millions of dollars, hopefully, to Nevada-based startups and inject that into our ecosystem and help build the startup and entrepreneurial world we have here in Nevada. Now, today, it's my pleasure to introduce CJ Cornell, and he's going to talk to us about intro into raising capital, and I'll touch base on our upcoming sessions. But I really want to talk about CJ here for a minute. CJ is a serial entrepreneur, investor, advisor, mentor, author, speaker, educator. He has worn all the hats and has a significant amount of experience in a number of different areas, all related to startups and entrepreneurism. As an entrepreneur, he's a founder of 9 startup ventures, collectively attracted over $250 million in venture capital, and creating nearly 1,000 new jobs. He's helped launch dozens of initiatives, and he in total exceeded some $3 billion in revenues. So he definitely knows the space in the entrepreneurship world and the startup world. But recently, Dr. Cornell has actually been a professor of digital media and entrepreneurship at ASU, and he is the co-director of the school's Knight Center for Digital Media Entrepreneurship. CJ's, of course, been a venture partner in Silicon Ventures. He's an angel investor for over 10 years. He sits on the board of a number of high-tech companies and many public entrepreneurship and economic development committees, particularly ecosystem development ones. In his spare time, he writes about entrepreneurship and spends a lot of time educating up-and-coming and advanced founders and entrepreneurs on everything related to entrepreneurship. And he's got a number of best-selling books and well-cited blogs on this topic. We will send out some of this information. Of course, it's pretty publicly available. You guys can find a lot of CJ's information and his works and his books online. We will, of course, share those links at the email that will follow this session, along with the recording of CJ's presentation and his slides. I do want to give a word for our upcoming sessions. We are going to be having some exciting speakers talk about our final two sessions on preparing for investment due diligence. So Dr. Cornell here will talk about, the intro into raising capital, the overarching things you need to think about. It'll be capped out with what do you need to do to prepare for that investment, and what are deal terms and terminology you need to know when you start engaging for investment with investors. And of course, next week, we have our pitch practice and deconstruction. It's very important that if you intend to bring your venture to bear, whether to investors or to customers, that you learn how to pitch and you be comfortable telling an audience what your venture is, what it does, and what you're addressing in a concise and effective manner. So these are really important. We highly recommend attendance. Please tune into this and take a chance and put yourself out there and take a chance at one of our pitch slots. We are proudly supported by Gus. Gus is a top-notch platform for investors and entrepreneurs who are looking to raise investment, to organize their deal information, their venture information, to disseminate it to investors or other entrepreneurs or co-founders. Follow us, please. Follow, share, follow what we're doing here in the ecosystem. Everything from pitch days to boot camps, incubators, accelerators, a lot of programming and a lot of work that we're doing here in Nevada, and a lot of partnerships and work that we're doing with the groups within our ecosystem. So please follow us, participate, share, and like. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. CJ Cornell, who's going to discuss intro into raising capital.
What I prepared today is startup 202, 203, the stuff that you might not hear for a while, or some insider stuff. And I'll tell you why, but I'm prepared to talk about anything you want having to do with funding to get where you want to go. All right, it's just that there's a lot of webinars and seminars about pitching and how to secure some small funding, and that's information that's well out there. I'm going to give you some stuff that maybe you haven't heard before, and maybe you won't use it today. It might be 6 months, it might be a year, but it'll come in handy. I'm going to give you context on what the intro was about. All this is meant to be is that I've started 6 companies as a founder, CEO, and many others as either a co-founder or as a participant in them. 3 of them have been successful, the rest have been failures. All right, and still going through therapy for some of them. And but 3 of them have been moderately successful. It doesn't mean I saw a lot of money from them. Lessons learned, a lot of lessons learned, meaning you can have successful companies and not make a lot of money. And I've been angel funded, I have been venture capital funded, and there's several times, and I've been a venture capitalist and an angel funder. So I know what goes on both sides of the table, and it's not what you think. Luckily, I'm one of those entrepreneurs who went to the dark side and came out and came back out to live to tell about it. What I mean by that is that once you're in, you don't want to tell people what goes on behind the scenes. It doesn't mean there's any nefarious stuff, but it's useful stuff to know about what gets you funded, what doesn't get you funded. By the way, I do spend most of my days these days writing. I actually brought a couple of my books to give away, and they're wonderfully, they're wonderfully in my hotel room. I unfortunately have forgotten. So I will send them over here, and they can just give a few away. And my next book coming out in a couple of months is all about mentorship in entrepreneurship, but I'm not here to plug that. Also, I spend a lot of time as a mentor. I'm a mentor for Techstars, something called Plug and Play, and the state of Arizona. I do quite a bit of work with the Kaufman Foundation on ecosystem building, which is helping large communities of entrepreneurs succeed, and also have some dealings with something called the NSF I-Corp. Okay. Why are we all here? Actually, I really do want to know this. Are some of you here just for background information, or some of you have already started companies? Okay. Unless you're in Silicon Valley, usually the first question is not how do I get funding, but how do I even find angels and VCs? And then when you do, how do I pitch to them and how do I convince them? It's a logical progression, but usually what ends up happening is you start to go into pitch events, you get turned down, you start going to some seminars and webinars, and then they teach you how to hone your pitch deck, do your financials, learn things. Tom, Sam, have you done that yet? And Sam and the market, and then do the business model canvas, then your financials, you pitch again, you get turned down, and you have to refine. It's kind of exhausting. I've been there. It's exhausting. It's also necessary, but it's still exhausting because you don't know, and you're competing with a lot of other folks. You don't know what they want. And I'm going to give you an example. This is quick. You could disregard these slides, but let's say that you want to buy a house, okay, and you want funding to buy that house. So you go knock on, you knock on doors? No, you go to a bank. Bank gives you funding. Well, only if you meet some qualifications for it or so. But let's say it's a really nice house and you want to flip it, you want to turn it around, and you need investors to do that. Well, they're going to ask questions like, well, why you? All right. And then they're going to say, but there's a lot of other houses in the neighborhood. Why that house? All right. And why are you particularly suited for flipping a house or building a house? So then you tell them, well, it's a really unique house. Okay. And everybody wants my unique house. And, some investors are going to say, all right, but are you going to build the house actually? Are you going to run the whole deal? You're going to need other people to do it. And then the investors might say, well, look, I'm only interested in making a lot of money from a lot of houses and building a whole lot of them. Is that you? All right. And so there's a lot of questions to be had. And then maybe you go to, instead of a bank, because a bank doesn't want to fund a brand new house like that. So you go to other investors and they know nothing about your wonderful geodesic house. All right. And it's still exhausting. All right. If you can relate to that a little bit better. And so as an entrepreneur, what the heck do you do? Well, I'm here to tell you, you're sort of doing it wrong, especially if you're seeking big money eventually for your business. All right. If you're going to need significant money, when I say significant money, we're talking anything that you can phrase in terms of millions. If you're seeking $10,000, there are places you can go for that. All right. Or at least there's some paths you can go for it. If you're seeking 100,000, you're seeking $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, the metrics are different. Okay. So I want to give you a little glimpse of how usually growth ventures, let's just talk about growth ventures for a moment, not a business that's, let's say a hot dog stand or what do they call that in the mall? The push cart businesses that benefit one person, but something that's going to be an investment. All right. The hard way, what usually happens, and you read about these success stories, especially if they're 21-year-olds who all of a sudden got $10 million worth of funding from a venture capitalist. All right. I'm here to tell you, if you read something on a blog about how they did it, disregard it. It is luck. All right. I don't mean they got lucky, but what they think they did to get the funding is not actually what got them the funding. They could say they did all these great things, and then at the last minute, it happened to be timing, that the venture capitalist was in the right place at the right time, or they had the right look. Okay. And whatever these folks tell you that they did to get the funding, it was probably great activities, but it's not a formula. All right. It didn't happen that way. All right. Organic is good. You build your company with no funding. Do hard work. You have some independent means of getting the funding done. And that happens a lot. And you grow the company. Well, but usually means you get no funding because you're building the company yourself. You have customers and revenues. So that's the hard way. The less than hard way, you got to know somebody. Okay. I can tell you that the last couple of fundings that I've had, it's because I knew somebody. I got to know somebody. They got to know me. I had a reputation. The first 3 companies that I had, I went knocking on doors. I pitched, I paid to pitch. I remember $500 to get in front of venture capitalists to pitch. They don't do that anymore, but I did at the time. God, it took forever to get funding. Second, after that was successful, another success. The third venture I had, it was a half a page proposal to a venture capital firm because they knew me, I knew them, and they knew my partner for it. And that ended up with $4 million and then $12 million of funding. I'm not bragging. What I'm saying is it gets easier once you know the game. Okay. There is a deliberate way to do this. All right. It still is hard work. It still takes time, but it takes less luck and it takes a little less privilege to do it. And I'm here to tell you about that game. Deliberate fundraising. So I'm going to give you 5 rules. I hate these, but 5 rules, but 3 actionable steps. You may not want to do them today. It may not be for your business, but heed them. This goes without saying. This is an obvious one, but be worth funding. All right. And I'm serious. A lot of people skip over this stuff. No, be a company that's worth funding. Now, I don't mean something that you love and you're trying to build your dream. Okay. What it means is have a product that people want and build a company around it. All right. Or at least have that be your intention, have that be your plan. I'm going to pause because I want to say this 2 or 3 times. Be worth funding. This does not happen day one. This is a process. And the sad part is that it's an iterative process. You get feedback, validation, customer validation. And the day that you're truly worth funding, you don't need funding anymore, which is one of the biggest paradoxes out there. But on your way to being worth funding, all right, that's the number one, because a venture capitalist can smell it right away. All right. Now, it doesn't mean that always that your company is worth funding. It could be that you're worth funding. It could be that the space that they're looking at is worth funding, and you happen to be in that space. All right. But something is what the worth is not your judgment. The worth is their judgment. Okay. Wait, no, don't take that picture yet. Okay. Have a funding plan. And that just doesn't mean I want $5 million. A real plan. Most people don't have a plan for funding. All right. And that plan isn't, I'm going to build my pitch deck, I'm going to pitch in front of 100 people and then eventually get funding. There is a process for it. There is a plan for it of how you spend your time. All right. The funding plan is more about the order in which you do things to build your company internally and externally. And we'll get through a few tips of that. This is a big deal. Know the differences between the different investors. Okay, this goes along with your funding plan. Who do you need and why do you need them? We just had a long conversation. Oh, she's not here, Audrey, about this. Of what VCs will fund and what they will not fund. Don't try to go up a mountain where there's nothing at the top of the mountain. All right. There are investors who want certain things. All right. And whether it's a return on their investment, whether it's a level of risk. All right. Sometimes am an angel investor. I don't care about patents, but a lot of angel investors care about patents and IP. So there's no one size fits all. There are differences. So I'm going to recommend, this will be in the slide deck. Don't bother reading this, but this is a fairly popular infographic about the types of funding appropriate for the stage of your business. So it'll be in the deck, and there's a URL attached to it. But there's friends and family, well, there's your personal fund, friends and family, angels, venture capitalists, and so on and so forth, where you're likely to get your funding from at different stages of business. Sure, there are deviations, there are exceptions to the rule. I wouldn't bet on being the exception to any rule. I know every founder thinks, oh, well, no, not me. I'm going to go, sure, go for it. But, okay, well, I was just saying that this slide is widely available on the web and has to do with the different kinds of funders appropriate for different types of businesses. If you get the slide deck, the URL is at the bottom of it. It's just for reference here. It has to do with finding the appropriate funder for yourself. So this is the important one. It's not all angels are alike. There are different types of angels depending on how much money they have, how much time and energy they put into it. So I was getting to one-shot angels. These are folks that you might see an announcement, they funded a company or so. It doesn't mean they're going to fund another company. And this is where a lot of entrepreneurs go wrong. If they see somebody's an angel investor and they think that they're always giving out money. You know, angel investors, the threshold to be an angel investor is you need to have some money, but it's not, how do I be polite here? It's not money that you can just give away all the time. There are some, it's their full-time business, but most, over 90% of the angels give about $10 to $15 to $20,000 in their one investment out there. Because angel investing, just so you know, is about the same level as venture capital investing out there. It's just that venture capital puts it in by the tens of millions and angels put it in by the tens of thousands out there. So that's the good news. The bad news is that you have to kind of corral all the angels and you don't know. All right. Now, there are other methods. They actually, if you corral a lot of angels, we call that crowdfunding. And there are some new laws that maybe we'll talk about where that can work to your advantage. There are superstar angels, mafia angels, meaning this is actually kind of interesting because these are angels that come from a successful company. They're not at the top, but they've exited a successful company. And if you're in that industry, that's actually a path I might recommend. If they're in your industry, and there are more of them than you might think. There's the ultra wealthy, which are not necessarily angels. And then there are executives. I call them angels in waiting. And that's like the secret that we're going to talk about after this. Okay, so here's the important part. Founder, funder, fit. Okay, this is important. Do not take a shotgun approach. Okay, know what the most appropriate type, you can rank them, but the appropriate types profile of funder is for your company or for your type. There may be many, but try to rank them. Okay, try to rank the most likely, realistically. And frankly, as an entrepreneur, you can't be realistic. You're not objective. Go talk to other folks and get a reality check of what the more likely ones are. Okay, and here's the big one. FOMO, if you don't know what that is, stands for fear of missing out. So anyone who is a more than one-time investor or who really looks to make money from angel investing or venture capital investing, this is what drives them. This is not a big secret. It's just that you don't want to say it out loud. Is that they're, for the most part, they're not really in it. They're in it to make money, but they're really in it because they don't want to be the one to say, yeah, I could have invested in Facebook, but I didn't. Okay, there's a lot of great stories. Anytime I see a famous venture capitalist, I always ask them about the one that got away. And because I love that painful look in their face when they talk about it. Because, as an entrepreneur, you sort of want to be the one that got away for them. You want them to regret it. But then again, you do want their money, though. So it's a little double-edged there, right? So, but there's ways to do it. Fear of missing out means you want them to come to you as much as possible. You want your strategy to be to have a venture so compelling that they come to you and say, please, can I invest in your company? That's just the most wonderful phrase there. May I invest in your company? You know what? At the top levels in Silicon Valley, that's a thing. All right. There have been more than one venture capitalist that has committed suicide because he couldn't invest in a hot company. Famous cases of it. I'm not going to tell you where. You could look it up. Okay. But it's that big because, because as venture capitalists, you're managing money for other folks. So your success is your ability to pick those winners and pick them before everyone else. And if you miss the next Facebook, well, that just goes to the heart of why you exist. Okay. Rule number one, add value first and then signal value. I'm talking about to the rest of the world. All right. What value are you adding? All right. Now, this is an abstract term, adding value, but let's say some of you might be in a fairly new field. or at least the way you're doing it also. Okay, and there is a certain sector of the business world that's intrigued with that. In theory, let's say crypto is of course a big example of it, but there are other smaller ways, and you could be the one to clarify that for them, to explain it in a way, because you're the expert in that, presumably, if you're starting the company. You're not starting the company to start to learn about it. Hopefully, in some way, you're the expert in some aspect of it. You can be adding value by talking to and it doesn't have to be new investors. It could be to the customer base. When I say talking, I'll explain what I mean by that. I mean virtually, all right? Of being the one to clarify the opportunity, clarify the field. That's your job. Show momentum and traction all the time, all the time. All right, well, frequently, how's that? Once a week, once every few weeks. This is your talent as an entrepreneur, to be able to spin almost everything as traction and momentum. Okay? Is there a news article out there that validates what you did? Post it and say, see, you don't say, see, I was right, but you're going to say, see, this is an example of how my field is doing well. All right. In a way, you are showing traction because it's showing that what you're doing is gaining traction out there, and traction adds up, and that equals momentum, of course. Momentum is what they invest in. Okay. Investors, professional investors, invest in momentum. Telegraph your credibility, which, by the way, comes from the two previous things. All right. But credibility is your previous accomplishments plus external validation. Consistency, I can't overstress this. Consistency is the most overlooked quality out there. Consistency is everything, especially, again, over a long period of time. All right. Oh, there's so much respect for an entrepreneur that just persists and consistently persists out there. So yeah, don't give up, but this is more than not giving up. All right. Always being there as the metronome, the voice of whatever it is your niche is. Okay. Action step one, be the Steve Jobs of your niche. If there's any one piece of advice that you take away and that I give all the time, is that figure out what your niche is. Niche is not the best of words, but what your unique slice of the business world is. That could be a technology, it could be an approach, it could be knowledge of a specific market, it could be a future that you're betting on, whatever it is. Talk about it all the time. You're going to be the Steve Jobs of that. Not only will this attract investors, which is important, but it's going to attract something else that I think as an entrepreneur, you're really going to appreciate more than investment. It's going to attract help. People want to help the next Steve Jobs. Think about the word Steve Jobs. If you look like you are that Steve Jobs, the head, the leader, the most knowledgeable person who is gaining traction momentum in your niche or industry, people are going to line up and say, how can I help? I want to be part of that. That's even more important than investments. And then there'll be people who say, wow, one day someone's going to be talking and saying, I'm really interested in this field. And somebody else says, you need to know this person, this entrepreneur. You want to be that person. All right. Now, I'm going to go back a step. That comes from consistency, validation. It comes from credibility. I'm going back because all that adds up to being that Steve Jobs. Next one. Seek and engage advisors. Advisors, if you don't know what that is, I've got a weird background. I started my my career as a nuclear engineer. Most people don't know that. Before nuclear, when nuclear was dangerous. And that's a fission chain reaction. Advisors cause chain reactions for you. All right. Advisors are your credibility by proxy. All right. Advisors. So if you try to knock on the door of your biggest dream customer and say, hey, buy my buy, I'm good, they may not even take your call. If an executive they know calls them up and say, hey, you need to know about them, they take the call. Okay, and if an executive of that executive, up the food chain does it, all right, it takes time. All right, you may not get those last proxy advisors, but if you're not in a position in doing what you're doing that you can't get somebody who knows your industry interested in talking to you, maybe not signing on as an advisor, but interested, then you don't know enough yet. You're not ready. Okay, get ready. Talk to them and say, I'm thinking of getting into this area. Or if you are, and I'm doing, what am I missing? Can I get some feedback from them? The day that an advisor says, if you said, hey, can you be an advisor to my company? That's when you know you've reached that first level of credibility. Okay, if you can't do that yet, get there. All right, the first advisor. I'm not talking about an advisor that's a subject matter expert like an accountant or a lawyer. Those are good advisors, but they help in different ways. I'm talking about a domain expert in your field or somebody who's in your market, like a customer or an executive who might possibly have been your customer one day. Your advisors might be your investor, but you might become your investor, or they'll lead you to an investor. Because if somebody in your industry is excited enough or trust you enough that they'll pick up the phone and use a little bit of their business capital, their social capital, to talk on your behalf, then you know you've reached that first level. Okay, keep on doing that. Your advisors will give you feedback on how to make it better. Now, 10% of it might not be accurate. They may not get it yet. 20%, maybe they may be right. They may be wrong, and if they're wrong, what it means is you haven't articulated it well enough. Advisors are so valuable in that way, not just in your property, but getting that feedback. Okay, don't underestimate that. That could be magic along with being the Steve Jobs. Okay, last one, which is the last step. All right, which goes along with consistency. Speak, post, share, write. Okay, it's a new world. This was not my world when I started, and I was cynical of all these millennial types every day tweeting and posting. Okay, you don't have to do it every minute of the day, but you need to be visible out there. You need to be positioned as the one building the business. And if you have a niche, whether it's a market, a customer base, an approach, could be something regulatory. There's all different ways that you can be unique. All right, uniqueness is all relative in a different way, but keep on articulating your expertise, your traction in this field. There doesn't have to be a lot of content. If you meet somebody who's echoing in a better way what you're doing, post that and then comment on it, because you're the Steve Jobs of that industry. It's really valuable. All right, and I'll give examples. There's one example that just comes to mind. Gosh, well, okay, one good example. Just it has to be about 2 years. There's an entrepreneur posting about how venture capital needs to be disrupted, and he's going to be the one to do it. And we're like, yeah, okay, yeah. And he would keep on posting about that, whether it was his own inane thoughts for the day on the subject, or every time he saw an article, or he would comment on others. And after a while, it was like, okay, here, and then, after a while, he was the one talking about this particular field. He could have been a journalist if that's all he did. And then eventually he announced that he was getting into the business. All right, not venture capital, but doing a different way. Like, all right, well, yeah, okay. But consistently speaking, sharing, writing about it. And then eventually there was enough people to say, tell me more. All right. And eventually somebody said, maybe I want to get involved. And eventually he got quite a bit of funding. Series A, over $20 million worth of funding for this. And now he is the leader, and he still posts and writes. And half the time, it's not exactly about the business; it's about his kids. He puts he relates it to the business. But it's a great example. It's not the only example. I'm not pointing it out for any other reason except that it's fairly stark and successful. There are a lot of examples. Some of them I don't even like, where just somebody was just so consistently out there positioning him or herself, and eventually they become what they what they created in the beginning, which was nothing. There's a guy in England, I won't say who he was, but he would just talk about venture capital all day, had a podcast about it. And eventually somebody gave him money to become a venture capitalist. The guy is not even 21, I think, at this point. I don't mean to say, but the point is that there's consistency in it. And the more he talks about it, the more he becomes an expert. He actually started to interview people, and the more he interviewed people, the more he became an expert. It's a virtuous cycle. Don't underestimate it. Social media is perfect for that. Okay, so where are we at now? Oh yeah, the dog gun. Well, you notice I didn't talk about a pitch deck. I didn't talk about valuation or pro formas or any of that. They're all important. All right. It's like when I was talking about funding your real estate or your house or all that. The forms are important. Don't get me wrong. Knowing your financials are important. It's just in a different order. Right? You still also need to be good at some of this. Okay. Different order. Now, let's go back though. The presumption of this presentation was venture capital, angel funding, in other words, significant equity funding from an outsider. That may not be your first money in. Your first money in may be funding from organizations like this, all right, or state organizations. Why? All right, they may or may not be interested in equity or return on investment. They're interested in you being successful because you're in this area. That's valid founder funder fit. Okay. That is funded. And are they your only funding? No. They will be your first likely funding. Why? Goes back to the first thing I said, have a plan. That may be part of your plan. That may be your first funding in as part of your plan. Okay. Last slide. This is just my vital information. And I have an ask that I'd like to little ask. Yeah, you can get my blog and my books, fine. But I launched a little thing called startupsavvy.com. It's just an online game. It's the equivalent of Wordle for entrepreneurs. It's just one question a day for entrepreneurs. See how many clues you need to get the question right. That's all. I just want you to check it out and give me feedback on it. But, oh yeah. Last book was called The Age of Metapreneurship, and the next book is called The Startup Brain Trial. Okay. And unfortunately, yes, I have 3 wonderful copies at home, rather in my hotel room that I forgot to bring, but I'll send them on over.
Please do.
And that after a couple of years just dropped from the top 20 list, but hopefully this one, which is all about startup mentorship, will replace it in January or February.
All right. We'll start now fielding questions. They're going to field some questions from the online audience or typing into the Zoom chat. And then, of course, we'll bounce that back and forth between questions here in the room.
The question had to do with if you had your head down for so long, almost in stealth mode, and what do you do that you've been quiet for so long? I think my personal answer is I get you because I've been there. And I was brought up not to talk about something until it's all done and over with. This is not the world today, because you're going to be outgunned and outdone by somebody who talks about it more than they're doing it. So the sooner that you can get out there and talk about what you're doing, the better. All right, because I'll tell you a couple of things. One is, aside from attracting funding and attracting help, all right, the more you talk about it, you're going to get more feedback to make your job easier. All right, because so many times, and right now I have different projects going on. I have programmers right now working on things, and they have a tendency to go off on their own and try to figure it out for a week or so, and they end up spending 20 or 30 hours of my money on doing something when all they had to do was get feedback, and I could have told them something to have them get it done in 1 hour. Okay, or to give them an approach or to clarify. So you know what? If you have your head down, this is not the world to do it in. No one's really going to steal your idea. All right. The only one who might look like stealing your idea, if you talk out loud about it too much, is someone who's already working on it and you just move them a little bit. So that it would have happened anyway. No, get out there, start talking about it. I know it's uncomfortable to talk about it when it's not done yet. I hate to say it, but get used to it. It is. You can still work on it, of course, but you'll get a better feedback loop. And again, as I said, then you'll start to get help. And that's even more important. You talk about almost everything, I would say. I mean, unless you're violating some trust or something, of course, but this is the world today. People need to hear about it. They need to know, and they want to know. And again, there's always someone doing something similar, and 50-50 chance that they'll go off and do it. The other 50 chance they'll say, what are you doing? Maybe we can work together.
What level of investment should I be seeking for a seed round with an MVP and some minor sales? He also added that he's currently working in the black market because he can't afford the approved facilities to manufacture my product.
Okay, this is a good point. I'm going to use it to illustrate a point
Okay.
as well. As an entrepreneur, you often confuse what you need with what the investor should invest in it. It's great if they're in line. They're often not in line. So for the moment, what you need versus what makes a good investment. I can't tell you how many pitch decks I've seen that say, look, here are the requirements, and then they show the projections, and I'm doing math in my head, all right, and saying, that's not a good investment for me. I don't care, in 5 years, it's just not a good investment, all right? Whereas for you, it's a good business. Okay, so the answer to your question is that there's no right amount, or there's no right amount of equity. What they want, make sure that the amount of money that you need is going to get you to a point that you're going to have 20x return in 5 years if you want venture capital. But I want to answer something else too. Most likely, if it's the first money in your company, the very first money, it's not going to be venture capital. All right. Here's an interesting statistic. I did research on this as a professor. All right. Every year, about 2,100 companies get their first outside money from venture capital firms. 21. This is like $100 billion industry of that, and thousands of companies. 2,100 get first money from venture capital. Every year, about 2,300 people become a millionaire from winning the lottery. More people win the lottery and become a millionaire than get first round of funding from the venture capital. Venture capitalists don't put money in for first round companies, right? Generally, there are some that have special funding. Now, you go to angel investors. Okay, the requirements are a little lower. Okay, but still, the amount of money that you need, all right, is going to drive founder funder fit. You have a manufacturing company. Maybe your funder is not an angel investor. Maybe it's a corporate or somebody who has a stake in having you succeed, all right, or a university, all right. You have options there, but it may not be, or rather, it may not optimally be an angel investor or a venture capitalist. And so when you prioritize your funding plan, remember that first one, all right, is angels and venture capitalists may not be in the top 3. All right, it may very well be a corporate funder, it may be your first customer. There are other ways of getting that first money in, all right, where the risk versus reward factor is more in line with what the investor wants. So quite often your first customer is your investor. And you find one of my company's first customer put in a purchase order that we were able to use as the investment. All right, because they love what we were doing. And they said, if you do this, it will be very important for us. We don't exactly want to make an investment, but we'll write a purchase order for it that you can take to other investors, right, to get this done, and roll dominoes fall. So I hope I sort of answered that question. Example was they wanted me personally to give an example of an investment I made. Sure. Of an angel investment I made. So I'm lucky because starting in 2008. I was a professor of entrepreneurship at Arizona State University. So I had exposure to a whole lot of young entrepreneurs, mentoring them. Not only exposure, but I could guide them in different directions. And there were several entrepreneurs over the course of time. And I've been doing that, not a professor there anymore, but over the course of time, since 2007, 2008, I've met a few that, once they got out of school, most of them got jobs. They got out of school, but some of them, they said, I wanted in. And there was one or two, particularly one, I first put in a few $1,000s when he first started the company. It didn't go anywhere. and he went out and got a job, and then later he started the company, and I was an advisor, and then eventually put in some money, and last December, the company started, got venture capital funding after the angel funding, and then last December they got bought, and everybody got a check from it. So it was very, very nice. But typically, and particularly for me, particularly angel investor is somebody you know, unless you're a full-time angel investor and you're fielding investments. The majority of angel investors, invest a handful of times. They have to know and trust the person or something because they have nothing else. They don't have an organization around them. And so that's how it usually happens. It's somebody you know and trust. For a lot of you, it's going to come from an advisor who you develop a relationship with. Some of the most successful paths of funding is you've got an idea, a market, a product, and you seek out a couple of advisors to get feedback. Former executives, let's say, from a company in your field, but they can recognize before anyone else that you have a better solution for it. You don't quite know yet, and they help you, and then eventually they introduce you. But they're an executive, so they probably have cashed out of they have some stock, and they make the first investment in the company. It happens so often out there. Often a check between 10,000 and 30,000. That's quite the sweet spot, 10 and 50,000. But this executive, and then they'll get another executive or someone else they know. This is a very typical path. And then there's an angel group. I don't know how many angel groups are here in Nevada. It's a very common route. It's up the food chain a bit, meaning more work. The angel groups, typically they pool their money together. They do a lot of due diligence. They pool their money so you get more of investment, but it takes longer because there's more people involved. Read that article. I have a lot in there on that. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question though. For me, it's just a few. And I'm very typical, over a course of a lifetime, just a couple of investments. There are some who made a lot of money and they get into it as a form of income.
George is asking for an example of when you've made an investment. You said previously that you don't necessarily focus on patents. Can you talk about a time when a patent was brought as a focus from the founder and it wasn't really a big, it wasn't something that was your main focus? What do you look for in a company that would make you not focus on the patent?
Well, you're talking to only one person who has one value here. All right. So everything about an investment is one, the potential return. And then after that, it's about how I can manage risk versus reward. All right. There are some, if you have a lot of money, you're placing a lot of bets on the roulette board, you can then focus on mostly the reward because you're spreading out your risk. But for the most part, you're trying to say, okay, there's a lot of factors that are risk, and you're trying to mitigate each one. All right. At the top of the list for almost every investor is the character and credibility of the founder. If you have that, almost everything else is third, fourth, fifth down the list. Now, if you don't know the founder that well, you just meet them anonymously. Now you're going to start looking at the other factors. All right. Like for instance, very common, there's a founder, you don't know them, but they come out of a university and they're the only ones who have the right to a patent from the university. Okay. Well, I don't have to know the founder, but this is valuable, right? There are others that they don't have that, but, and you don't know them, but they've created 3 other companies that were big. All right. That sort of mitigates the risk. All right. If they don't have that, there are other founders, you don't know them, blah, 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 but they've got 27 companies as customers that are hard to have as customers. Okay, that mitigates the risk. So a lot of you remember, stereo equalizer, where you have to do. So there's no one factor. You just have to, one of them could be really high and the rest of them could be low, or it could be a mixture of it. But overall, it's got to make the investor comfort level from reward and the 20 things that signify risk. How can you mitigate those? And most of the time, though, it comes down to the founder, the credibility of the founder. And if you don't know the founder, then you have to look at everything else.
Can you discuss a little bit about what are the founder characteristics that are most important that you're looking at? what are the most important elements investors look for startups, for founders of startups that they choose to invest in?
I'm sorry, you're asking about the founder or the startup?
Let's start with the founder. He says founder / startups. So let's start with I think founder is great. So what are the most important characteristics of the founders of a venture that you're looking for? And you talked a little bit, you talked a little bit about it there, just barely, but if you can touch on a few more of those items and then go from there. And I think you said that one of the most important things of a startup itself is the founders.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much always. I'm sure there are outlier cases where the founder doesn't matter. But it's going to be nothing that I haven't said before, though. The credibility of the founder, which is a Russian nested of different qualities. But if the credibility is also, look, have they done it before? Can they do it again? Are they respected out there? All right. If all of those are 10 out of 10, then seriously, what the founder is actually doing doesn't matter. Okay, there's an example that I gave before. That's not my example, it's a famous one though, which was, and there's a couple of lessons in that. So there's a venture about 10 years ago. They were funded by, I think, one of the top venture capitalists out there, and they had quite a sum of money, and they were working on something. They had some successes in the past, but they were working on something. And, amongst them, they said, we can make this work, but we're just not believing in it. And they finally decided, you know what, we haven't spent much of the money. Let's give it back to the venture capitalists and just tell them, we want to shut this down. And they did that. They went to the venture capital and they said, we have this other idea we'd rather work on. The other idea, it's sort of like text messaging, but it's only 140 characters. And we're going to have people send out just these short messages. And of course, that was Twitter. The company was Odeo, which you probably never have heard of. And the founders had some small track record, but they had this other idea. And their credibility in saying, we don't want any money, and the investors said, you know what? It's not the product that we believed in before or the company, it was you guys. So we'll invest in you. And you'll find that every repeat success has been because they believed in the founder and what the founder could do. Okay, and it happens quite. Now, there are times when it's not quite the founder, it's the idea. I can give you two great examples of it, three. Uber. All right, Uber was about, because the sharing economy and all of that was just paramount, and venture capitalists were probably going to invest in almost any company that was going to dominate the sharing economy. It certainly wasn't the founder. All right, they can tell you that. All right, Groupon is another example of that, of where it wasn't the founder, but most of the time it's the founder.
When you have a truly new category of solution, what is the best way to get the attention of investors who may not be familiar with your solution and it is difficult to explain it in 12 slides?
Okay. Yeah, I've been there. I've been there with the new category thing. A, it sucks. B, don't be unique in that case. Number one. All right. Be like something else. It's always like something else. Okay. Bitcoin, blockchain was a new category, but it was like something else. But it takes longer. Number two, you combine that with something, two things that do not belong together. New category, and I can't explain it. No. All right. If you are a founder, all right, I don't care what it is you do. I don't care if it's a new category or not. Get good at explaining it. That is your job as founder. If you can't explain it, you're not ready. All right. It takes practice, but get good at explaining it. There's a lot of, you can get feedback loops from people, even if it is from somebody, a stranger or a family member. I know, I've been there where you explain it to somebody and then they repeat it back to you and you're like, no, that's not what I said. and then you walk away going, they just don't get it, right? No, you just can't explain it, okay? And get good at explaining. I'm sorry, that's something you can control. All right, the new category part, I'll also say, and pardon me, I don't mean to insult anybody, I've been there, is that it is a bit of arrogance, and entrepreneurs need to be arrogant, but if you keep on insisting that it must be a new category, then you dug your heels in, all right? be comfortable with people saying, oh yeah, it's like this other category, and don't fight it. Okay, just say, yeah, but more. Okay, don't fight being a new category. No one wants to do that, not going that way. They want to say they're a new category looking backwards, but not going that way. All right, so number one, you can control getting good at explaining it. Number two, get used to taking a deep breath and saying, yeah, it is like this other category. Question was about Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes and the blood booking.
How did she establish credibility?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Lots of lessons in that. Oh, gosh, oh, boy. Okay, so it could be, Theranos is a little slightly closer, just slightly, because Arizona, where I'm from, went all in and bringing Theranos to our state, and the governor bet on her. Luckily, it didn't stick to him. So, okay, number one, she came from Stanford. Okay, all right. You know, I hate that, but yeah. Number two, she was a dropout. She fit a mold. Number three, okay, people wanted to back a woman at that time. They felt good about it, okay? But on the good side, for good or for bad, she was the Steve Jobs of her industry. I mean, literally, like she wanted to wear the turtleneck, and she studied to be Steve Jobs. I didn't mean to go all the way in that direction, but she was good at explaining it. She became like a Pied Piper and getting help, okay? You know, I didn't talk that much about feedback loops, but boy, oh boy, you know, once people get behind you, everybody, fear of missing out. Every venture capitalist, right, wanted in on that deal. No one wanted to miss out. Number three, all my point, the advisors. She got some premium advisors, and that lent credibility, and it spread out her influence in there. So all the right things, you know, and then, boy, just a couple of unethical steps really blew up badly. And I don't mean to say, oh, just a couple of mistakes. You know, it blew up badly. It's tough as an entrepreneur. I don't want to support her, but you know, sometimes you are building. You know, you're building a future that doesn't exist. You're explaining a product that often doesn't exist. It's a fine line. It's a fine line, and I feel for her in that respect, because so many entrepreneurs, right? You're describing what's gonna be, whereas, you know, in your lab or on your kitchen table, it really isn't there yet. All right. When you get your funding and it's all done with, you're a genius and a visionary. But if you don't, it never works. You know, you're a con man, right? She's the con person. Now, there's a lot more to it than that. But how did she get it? Right. The pedigree. Timing, because a lot of investors wanted to invest in a woman. She articulated it, told a great story, and she literally wanted to be the Steve Jobs of that industry. Make those work for you. Just be ethical about it.
What are some of the major components of the funding plan that you mentioned earlier?
Okay, good. So it's usually the order in which you need to do things, okay? And so they're not all the same. But I would say the first one is to validate. This is nothing new. Your MVP, or to validate your idea or your product. I don't necessarily think it needs to be a minimum viable product, but validation. Okay, it could be from an executive, an external validation, of course. It could really be from a couple of potential customers or executives saying, if they do this, we really need this. All right, it's sort of a feedback loop, and you need, you need somebody to blink first, right? But getting that validation, making sure that you have that venture worth funding. Don't go for the funding before you do that first step, that your idea, your product, all right, worth funding. All right. Second is you're going to now have to start working on progressively more credible, real pieces of evidence, okay? The more evidence that you have, when I say evidence, there's a whole checklist. Okay, we talked about patents if you need them, if you're in life sciences, et cetera. It could be customers, it could be employees, it could be a lot of things. Things that say that you're going to be successful to someone who's not as close as you. Sometimes it has to be sales, all right? But that this is not in order. You continually work on that. Continually work on that validation evidence. Third, in your funding plan order is what I said: get out there, talk, get out there, make the rounds, talk. The value in my opinion, in pitch contests and in funding contests is not exactly in going for the money. It's getting out there, because in your community, the more you do it, I don't care if you win, no one cares if you win, because there's only one winner, and winning is subject to a lot of, it's not always the best company. All right. But you're out there as a credible spokesman, someone who one day might get funded. All right, do it. Even if $50,000, $10,000 isn't going to be meaningful if you're looking for 50 million, do it anyway, because it's great practice. It's better that you practice either on social media or here in front, than you practice in a venture capitalist office where you only get one meeting. Okay. All right, because you'll get that feedback, and believe me, it's a gift. Yeah, and you're going to get jerk. I'm trying to be G-rated here. Jerk investors in the audience, and people who are going to ask stupid questions, arrogant questions. This is great for me because I had little tolerance for this, and it's great it helps you hone the way you answer the question, your humility, your, what's the word, patience for these folks, and everybody respects you for it. And you'll get that reputation. All right. And then last is, well, not last, but the second half of it is, okay, I'm ready to go for funding. You still have to run your company, all of that. But now at that point, you have a C list, a B list, and an A list of funders you're going after. Do not go out of order. You do not want to go directly, even if somebody introduces you to Mark Andreessen, probably the top venture capitalist. If you haven't pitched in front of other people, if you haven't done this before, I don't know if I would do that. Right? Because if you flub it, that's going to be the end of it for a while. And worse, if you really flub it, they're going to tell other people. Okay, so you want to identify likely A-list. Now, how do you do that? Who else is funding in your industry? Who else is interested in your, well, not just your industry. There could be industry, technology. There you have several different facets of your niche, all right, and there are investors interested in that. All right, pitch before them. Sometimes you want to pitch even when you say, "Look, can I just run this by you? I know you're not a likely investor, but run it by. Can I run it by you?" Okay, sure. That actually takes the pressure off. Okay, but create a B list, a C list, a B list, A list, and sort of execute in that direction. All right, you'll know when you're ready to accelerate it, because you're going to find that the CEO eventually they're going to say, the first level of success is when somebody says, "We're good, but find a lead investor," which tells you you did okay, but not quite okay. All right, and the more you find that, you'll get better at it. Okay, or you'll find out quickly that this is not the appropriate route. Maybe I need to go to angels. Maybe I need to go to corporate funding. There are many different, that chart I saw, there's different routes that might be very likely. Corporate funding is an overlooked one, all right? Particularly if you have a solution that the industry appreciates more than the general investors. I want to say this, I didn't say this quite well enough in the presentation. I did this little chart where it was just an exhausting spiral. That spiral has to do with pitching and having to educate investors on your field, on your niche. And then they only have them raise their hand and say, "What was that again?" And it's exhausting. It's easier to go to investors who already understand your business. All right. Spend more time finding out who they are. Okay. And a lot of times it's the corporate investor, it's your customer. They get it and they get what you do. They may not get a startup per se, but they get the value of what you do. And what you're looking for is dominoes to fall, right? You're looking for somebody to push that first domino down. Corporate investors are good, but the point is that find folks who understand your business. So that goes in that funding plan. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of a path.
Excellent. There. How much do investors act upon a solution to emerging government mandates? So if a startup is anticipating a government mandate and or regulation that is basically creating a market for them, Do investors act on those, even if, if there's the market hasn't been validated yet necessarily, it's emerging government mandates. Can you talk a little bit about that, investors' interests and how they act on those?
Absolutely. Actually, it's a good question. A quick anecdote. The last real business that I started and sold was actually after I was a professor in 2014. I started a crowdfunding company, equity crowdfunding, and grew it and sold it. And the reason I sold it was because we were in regulation, and I personally don't want to be part of a regulated company. However, as an investor, I find it very intriguing because regulation is like a built-in competitive advantage. In the med tech field, where you have, or healthcare field, where you have to overcome certain regulatory hurdles, it's difficult. But if you're a founder who knows how to do that, yeah, for a lot of investors, that's a real advantage. You have to go to somebody who understands that advantage. You don't want to have to keep on repeating it. But I've learned over the past 12 or 15 years from being involved in certain ventures that someone who can understand how the insurance and Medicare works is a marketable skill set. And if you're starting a business, yeah, it's hard to get in, but once you're in there, that could be a real money-making business. So yeah, there are a lot of investors who really like that. Again, investors who like patents as well. All right, now they know that better than I do. But find them because they appreciate it more. And I'm learning to appreciate it. I don't understand it as much, but this is a competitive advantage that the next guy. So if you do it great, a lot of like social media and internet businesses, if you're the first one to do it, you just made it easier for the next 100 people to get in your business. Not so with regulated business, right? You overcome that hurdle, you just made it even harder for the next guy. So yeah, there are a lot of investors, a lot of corporations, a lot of venture capital funds who really do appreciate it. The idea is to find them, right? And they're not hard to find. You just look for what they're doing now or what they've already invested in. So certain investors are expecting a certain amount of return. And the question is, how do you know how to build your company or your financials? First of all, I wouldn't build my company just to cookie cutter fit the expectations of a particular investor. No, build your company, plan your company, and then when you look at it, it will be you will be appropriate for one of those types of investors. So that's a problem in a way, is to try to pitch yourself or force fit or tweak your financials so that they will please an investor. Now, investors, a lot of them are smart people. So they can talk to you and say, if you do these things, you can be this type of company, all right? And it will interest us. Now, the question is that what you want? You don't know that yet, all right? But, either in your industry, and I don't know what industry but there are industries that are appropriate for 20x investments, and there are industries that are not. Right? There are industries that generate a lot of cash right away. And there are industries like, for instance, Facebook or Google didn't generate any cash until they went public. Okay, but they were good investment machines, right? They're different, right? And Google and Facebook attracted different investors than you would, right? But there are investments that are steady and they will generate cash over a long period of time. Will traditional venture capitalists go for that? No, there are some. There are some that will go for cash flow generating business. There are some venture capitalists, and that's why you do your research to fit. There are many venture capitalists don't like the consumer business, but there are a few. I can tell you that a company called Mavron Investments, who was founded by the Starbucks founder, loves those things. All right. There are most investors don't like service businesses because they're very labor intensive and the margins are not high. Now, Uber, in a way, is a service business, but it's structured quite differently and it attracted the interest of it. But there are service businesses that are attractive to certain investors. So again, it comes back to funder fit. But what I didn't mean to imply is force it or craft your venture for the funder. I don't know if that's ever a good outcome for that, because you're building it just to get the investment. I'd be wary of that. Just be aware that if you have a venture that is looking for $1 million in funding, and you're going to be a $20 million a year business, that actually doesn't work out. The math doesn't work out for the investor, at least in 5 years or so. Not for venture capital, but it will for other investors. That's the point. If you're pitching in front of one and everything's great, and you get to that slide, they're like, great, but the best you can hope for is a recommendation to somebody else. So that's why doing your research and making sure that you're that fit. But I would not craft my venture just for a particular. I can only think of some rare exceptions that you would want to do that, and I'm not even going to mention those.
Do you have any final closing remarks on anything you discussed at all?
I was going to think of some really great thing to say. Would you take like 3 bad things to say instead? No, I'm just so. Funding is hard, and not every business needs to be funded right away. Never before in history do you have so many options. All right. One thing I have not mentioned about a funding plan is that, in case it doesn't go without saying, it's not just one tranche of funding. All right. Funding is in different stages. Very rarely you just get one funding and that's the end of it. As a matter of fact, that's the worst thing as an investor, anybody. All right, if I put in some money, it's not like I want it back right away, but if my 50,000 is going to get you to a point where a venture capitalist is going to put in 5 million, well, I mean, I'm not going to get money from that, but on paper, my investment just went up 1,000 times. Okay, but if all you want is my 50,000, then I got to wait. Well, it doesn't make sense. There's no quite upside to that, right? Now I got to wait or get money. It gets complicated, right? But every investor wants to see go up until you get bought or until you go public, right? And so that's where the funding plan is. So step 1 may not be an angel or a venture capitalist. Step 1 may be 3 different steps of a pitch competition plus a customer to pay you in advance. There's all sorts of those. And then go from there to the equity investor. So that's an important point that I didn't, because it's not all just about, searching for that all important angel investor. All right. And before that is friends and family. There are other options. There's crowdfunding, which is not Kickstarter, by the way. There's just crowdfunding. It's work. I want to make sure you understand it's work. All right. It's better to work on your company, the credibility, and do all of that, and let them come to you. Going from door to door is work. So again, the more you can do to make them come to you, the better. All right. And when I say come to you, which may mean someone else is talking about you, and then they come to you. Just never forget that one. That's the last point I want to make.